Let's get talking, shall we? Hello, beautiful people of the world. I wanted to make this video because people are always talking about how they got into Harvard, how they got into Stanford, how they got into all these schools, but no one actually talks about how they got rejected from schools, because that's what happens 95% of the time. And I actually got like a hate comment on my college decision reaction video that was like, why don't stupid people make these videos? How come only the smart people make college decision reactions? Well, let me tell you, I think college decisions doesn't come down to who's smart and who's dumb. It comes down to who has privilege, who got lucky, who was living in the right places, who went to the right school, who did the right activities. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or how smart you are. So with that out of the way, I would like to just talk about how I got rejected from Harvard, which was actually my dream school for a very long time. Well, so this lighting makes me look like I have no eyebrow, but maybe that's true. Who needs societal judgment anyway? We don't conform. That's why we're talking about how I got rejected from Harvard. All right, anyway, how did I get rejected from Harvard? Well, first, let's start with my stats. So as we all know, if you look at my stats video, I had some pretty good stats. Took some hard classes, got good SAT and ACT scores, had a 4.0, everything that is standard for a Harvard applicant. And therefore, I don't think it was the stats that kept me out of Harvard. Next. Thank you, next. Okay, moving on to the extracurriculars. So, what does Harvard look for in their applicants? Iris, I'm a Harvard admissions officer, and when I think about it, we want leaders in this world. Harvard breeds the next generation of world leaders. Oh, okay, well, I was president of a club. I started my own organization and I published a book. Does that make me a leader? I think that makes you a pretty good leader. Okay, can I get into Harvard? Well, let's look at your teacher recs and your essays and what school you went to. All right, so from that conversation with the admissions officer, it's pretty clear that it's not really my extracurriculars that got me out of Harvard. So let's move on next to my teacher recs. All right, Iris, let's see what this girl's teachers has to say about her. Iris Fu is an intelligent student who is hardworking and knows her stuff. Sounds like a stereotypical Asian applicant. She is ambitious and she is one of the top students in her class. Yup, that is very, very stereotypical Asian. Personal rating, -1. All right, so from that conversation, it seems like the teacher recs might have gotten me out of Harvard. But to be frank, I think it wasn't my Asianness that kept me out of Harvard, as what the Harvard admissions lawsuit may stereotype or suggest. I think it was more that I didn't have what Harvard was looking for, or that I just didn't get lucky. So let's kind of leave the teacher rec on a open note, like we don't really know what happened there. The same teacher recs got me into Stanford and 2 other Ivy Leagues and Vanderbilt and some other great schools. So we're gonna leave teacher recs up in the air. So let's move next to essays. Let's look at this girl's essays. La 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 la. Okay, so this part of the application process, the essays, is by far the most subjective part of the application, because every single school is kind of looking for a different vibe, I would say. And I don't really know what the Harvard and Princeton vibe is, but I feel like they're kind of similar. And I got into the weirdest school, Stanford, which is known for a wacky essay vibe. All of the Stanford admits that I talked to wrote about some really weird shit. And I personally did too. I wrote about dog testicles and playing my flute, which isn't weird at all. And yeah, some not weird stuff, but the dog testicles thing was weird. In my roommate essay, I compared myself to a metaphorical bridge, and it was pretty quirky, but pretty fun. So I think that's what got me into Stanford, and I basically used the same Stanford essays in my Harvard supplemental essays. And maybe Harvard just ain't looking for the same type of applicant that Stanford is looking for. And you know what that means for you, future applicant? That means you should diversify your applications and just be you, be who you are, write all those essays out in the way that you would, and then just submit them to different colleges. You know, it's kind of like dating on Tinder. You put that picture that represents who you are in your truest form, and you just let other people see it and swipe right or left, depending on their heart and their desires and who they are. And so if Harvard says no to you, that just means you weren't meant to be with Harvard. Stanford was the boy who saw me as who I was and loved me, but Harvard was the darker Romeo who just said bye-bye. But also, another hypothesis I have for Harvard is that I didn't really try on their essays, which is a big problem because I wrote my essay, like I remember writing that essay like the day it was due, and I was like sending it to my friends to have them look it over. They all said it was good, and I personally think it was good. It was like one of my favorite pieces because Harvard, if you don't know already, they have a 650-word supplemental essay where you can basically write about any topic, anything that you want. And so how I formatted it is I formatted it into 3 different chapters surrounding the same theme. And I don't really remember what the theme was, but it was just something really quirky, and it was just like 3 of my extracurriculars. And for the beginning of every short story, I had like a really funky question, like, Iris, why would you do this? And then I would like answer it with like my paragraph. And I thought it was really cute. My friends really loved it. I think it was really true to who I am. And so the fact that Harvard rejected me just meant that they ain't meant for me. All right, next, let's talk about what school I'm from. So I am from a school in Oregon, in a pretty small school where the last Harvard admit we had was like maybe like 10 years ago. Like they definitely already graduated from Harvard, and he is currently working on Wall Street. So that was a very long time ago. So Harvard just has not accepted any student from my school in like 10 years, whereas our last Stanford acceptance was like 4 years ago. And we did have 2 twins get in last year from another school in my school district, but literally no one from my school district has gotten into Harvard for like a decade. And if you know anything about Ivy League admissions, it's that these schools have connections with high schools. There are private schools who are like feeder schools into Harvard and Yale, as well as like Columbia, and I bet there's some for Stanford as well. But I think it just so happens that I'm on the West Coast and that Stanford has taken students historically from my high school more often than Harvard has, that I had a better shot at Stanford. And also, if you've read anything about how COVID-19 is affecting college admissions, there is this theory that colleges are admitting more students who are closer to where they're located because that could potentially increase their yield rate. Let me define yield rate. So yield rate is basically the percentage of students accepted actually attending the school. So if you think about it, if you're a college, you want to increase your yield rate as much as possible because that makes your school seem like you are a school that people are attracted to. So with COVID-19, it's more difficult for a student far away to travel by plane to your school to attend than it is for a student to just like drive like an hour to your school, right? So if you think about it, it does make more sense for Harvard to accept more East Coast students this year with COVID-19 so that it's more likely that 1, they visited the school before and are more likely to choose Harvard. Secondly, if there are still restrictions for travel in the fall, students on the East Coast are more likely to make it to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so I think that's about it for a little sit down chit chat about how I didn't get into Harvard. The 2 big question marks are still my teacher recs and my essays, but I'm pretty sure my stats and my extracurriculars did not keep me out of Harvard. It was really the fit between me and Harvard and the fact that I didn't really go to a school that fed into Harvard, and the fact that I wasn't a legacy or athlete or anything like that. So I basically had no advantage into getting into Harvard, whereas I might have had a little bit of a geographical advantage of getting into Stanford. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this very honest sit down and chat with me. If you enjoyed it, please give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Shameless plug for my friend Sophia here. She did a video on rejected by Yale, accepted by Harvard. Link in the description. Leave me a big comment about what you're up to during quarantine, and I'll see you next time.